who really pays the true cost
Right.
of food? And one of the challenges today is because ultra-processed food has so much sugar that's added to it, in particular fructose, but also glucose can be a problem too. We are now making people fat, visceral fat, subcutaneous fat, but starting off with this liver fat.
Right.
And then the taxpayer, in the case of some of the sickest in America and the uninsured, and then around the world where people have global access to universal health care in most countries, that the true cost of all this ultra-processed sugary food is being paid by the public and the tax citizens. And we have to change the incentives if we're going to understand the true cost. And now the food doesn't look that expensive relatively for its impact that it has on sickness.
People need to understand that 62% of all healthcare dollars are paid by the federal government.
In Medicare, Medicaid?
All.
All.
62% of healthcare dollars are paid by the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get sick, that affects me. There's externalities to everything.
Yeah.
People in America have this notion of personal responsibility.
Hey, it's my life, it's my choice.
If you're fat, it's your fault. It's your own damn fault.
And if I want to get fat, that's up to me.
That's
what people are saying.
That's what people say.
Yeah.
The question is that true? The concept of personal responsibility. Where'd you first hear of that? Was it in the Declaration of Independence? Was it in the Constitution? Was it in any state legislature constitution? Was it in the Magna Carta? You know, like, who came up with the notion of personal responsibility?
Yeah, I can't even remember.
The tobacco industry. The tobacco industry. Because they were getting killed on the science. And they had to invent another reason for you to smoke. So, if you actually look for the term personal responsibility, 1950 was the very first paper that equated cigarette smoking with lung cancer. The Dahl paper, Richard Dahl. In 1964, the Surgeon General came out with the famous, Surgeon General report, basically equating smoking with lung cancer. Was there any mention of personal responsibility between 1950 and 1964? None. In fact, the tobacco industry was silent on this whole issue till 1964. And then in 1964, they started putting out their own public relations missives in op-eds and ads, etc. And the thing that they said, 3 words that they basically used as their mantra for trying to deal with the problem: assumption of risk. And so assumption of risk, in other words, if you smoke, you're assuming the risk. Okay? And that carried them from 1966 all the way up into 1978. And 1978 was the first time that you ever saw the term personal responsibility anywhere. Didn't exist until 1978. But it was the tobacco industry basically changing their tactic. And the reason they were changing their tactic was because the class action lawsuits were now coming fast and furious. Up to that point, they were all individual lawsuits, and they were able to bat all of them away. 845 separate actions against the tobacco industry, and only 2 of them made it out of Superior Court, and both of those were knocked out on appeal at the appellate level. Okay, so the tobacco industry was batting 1,000. And then the class actions started. And all of a sudden, they pivoted again from assumption of risk to personal responsibility. And somehow, personal responsibility glommed on to the entire American ethos. Yeah, personal responsibility. Yeah, it's your own damn fault. This was never part of America until the tobacco industry gave it to us. Well, guess what? The sugar industry adopted it too. After that. And so now personal responsibility for obesity, personal responsibility for, what you basically put on your plate. Okay, it's all your own damn fault. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. And it never would work. And the reason is because of the externalities. Because what you consume affects me. Because healthcare is going to hell in a handbasket. Because we will not have healthcare when you'll need it. Because it will be gone. Because Medicare and Social Security will be broke by the year 2029 because of metabolic syndrome. Not because of obesity, because of metabolic syndrome, which is sugar. So this whole concept of personal responsibility, this whole concept of how we're going to deal with the problem has to be completely rethought. And we have to understand that this is a global problem. This is a problem that government needs to address. This is not something that individuals can fix. This is not something that the food industry will want to fix. Now, the question is, can that work? And the answer is absolutely it can, and we have a model. We actually have a template for how to do this. In 2003, the Blair government in the UK called together all of the food companies in Britain, so Tesco and Marks and Spencer and Waitrose, etc., to a secret meeting. And at that meeting, the Blair government announced hypertension and stroke have gone through the roof in Great Britain. And it's because of the salt in the diet. And we are going to get the salt down. You, food companies, are going to reduce the salt content of each of your offerings by 10% per year over the next 3 years to a final reduction of 30%. And we're not going to tell anybody. All under the wire. Everyone plays, so no one has a competitive disadvantage. And we're not telling the public. We're just going to do it. And we, government, are going to play referee. And they did it. And sure enough, 30% reduction over the course of 3 years. And in 2011, paper came out in BMJ showing a 40% reduction in hypertension and stroke in Great Britain due to this dietary manipulation that no one knew about.
That's a beautiful and benevolent example. Do you ever worry, especially as somebody like you who was saying earlier, you have certain libertarian views on certain subjects?
Certain.
Do you ever worry that power, when also given to a government and it not being transparent and the public not playing a part in it, that all of a sudden there's other things that the government is now starting to add to either the food system or mandates that they're starting to make, because the government doesn't have a great track record of understanding the science when it comes to areas that are hotly debated. And I think that is one general sort of thing that people, especially that probably listen to this podcast, are like, yikes, that sounds like a good example. But then what happens when the wrong actors have power? Is there ever a concern around that?
I'm always concerned when the wrong actors have power.
Because you give it to one, you can't necessarily take it away from another.
I understand that. I'm always concerned when the wrong actors have power. The question is, who has power now? The wrong actors, the food industry. And what they did was they started adding sugar back in the 1960s because they all went low, because they were told to go low fat. Well, how'd they decide to go low fat? Because the government told them to go low fat. That was a problem, right? Agreed. But how did the government figure that out? Because the sugar industry paid off 2 Harvard School of Public Health nutrition scientists to say so. Fred Stair and Mark Hegsted. Fred Stair was the head of the Department of Nutrition at Harvard, and Mark Hegsted was his deputy, who ended up becoming the head of the USDA. It was a put-up job all along.
So you're basically saying the food industry already has power.
They're already bad
something.
actors. And they're already bad actors.
Now, if you look at the case of alcohol and tobacco, it seems to be that in addition to the Surgeon General coming out and making their statement when it comes to tobacco, a big part of the campaign around tobacco that lowered consumption was taxes.
Yeah.
How do you feel about taxes when it comes to processed foods, added sugar, etc.?
I'm for them, but here's why. Here's the difference. I'm for them and I'm against them.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a little complicated.
Yeah.
How can you be
Let's get
for
into
against?
No,
and
let's get
against,
into the
just
nuance.
like John Kerry. A little flip flop. No, not at all. I'm not flip flopping at all. Okay. I'm actually against taxes, but here's why. When you initiate a soda tax or a sugar tax, it's really 3 taxes in one. It's not 1 tax, it's 3. We just don't call the other 2 taxes. First tax is the subsidy, the food subsidy, the sugar subsidy. Because if you're subsidizing one thing, that means you're raising the price on everything else because you have to make book. There's no free lunch. So if you subsidize a product.
Through crop subsidies,
Farm bill, absolutely. So let's get rid of all the subsidies. So the people say, well, if you got rid of all the subsidies, price of food would go sky high. Actually, the Giannini Foundation at UC Berkeley did this exercise several years ago. They modeled what would food look like if we got rid of all, it has to be all the food subsidies, not just the sugar subsidy, but all the food subsidies. And it turns out the price of food would not change except for 2 items, corn and sugar, the things we'd want to go up to try to reduce effective availability. So a subsidy is really a tax. It's a subsidy on one thing, a tax on everything else.
Right.
That's for tax number 1.
Mm-hmm.
Tax number 2, we don't call it a tax. We call it a premium, an insurance premium. Because your employer, which does Mark pay you? He's paying $2,750 a year for obesity-related health care, even though you're not obese. Okay? Every employer is paying $2,750 a year for obesity-related health care, irrespective of whether that individual is obese or not. Well, that employer can't afford that. So that means your salary is lower because of it.
That's why we needed so many young people on Obamacare. Right?
Exactly.
To take care of the primarily older people who are obese.
Correct. Well, that we don't call that a tax, but it is because it's coming out of your pocket. It's called a premium. And then finally, there's the sugar tax or soda tax itself. So that's 3 taxes in one. If you got rid of the subsidies, you could get rid of the other 2. So I'd rather see getting rid of food subsidies. The problem, of course, is that means Congress.
Right.
Because only the Congress can fix that because that's in the Farm Bill.
Yeah.
Okay? If Congress won't act, then the next best thing to do is a sugar or soda tax.
Mm-hmm.
But getting rid of the subsidy is way better. So that's why I'm for it and against it.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. Going back to also one of the conversation on subsidies, Sam Katz said one time when I heard him in an interview at this organization Summit that I'm part of, Summit Series,
mm-hmm.
He was saying, we give too much credit to subsidies. Subsidies has allowed for all these efficiencies in these big processed food companies.
Yep.
And so it's the efficiencies that, because they're efficient at using corn for this, they're efficient at using, all these major crops that are there. And so to that I say, okay, great. So use the efficiencies and don't have the subsidies towards it, right? So it still goes back to your idea, which is let's not give favorable edge because that's crony capitalism,
right?
Fake capitalism. Let's have everybody sort of fend for themselves.
Well, that would be good.
And let's see, how that would happen.
I'm for the market.
Yeah.
Let the market work. Subsidies distort the market.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get rid of the subsidies. Let the market work. Even the libertarians can get on board with that.
So what is your hope now, zooming out and after you publish the paper, and also this Kuwaiti company?
Yep.
If you can provide us any insight, because they're dealing with the realistic aspects of market share, a consumer base that has been addicted. And like you said at the beginning of this podcast, what happens when you go 30 days without sugar? The first 7 days are hell. And imagine that on a population level where people are getting that reduction.
Well,
zero.
They're not going to zero. We're not getting rid of sugar. That's part of the genius of this.
Is there a phasing in that they're trying out?
Yes. And they're not telling the public.
Will there be an increased price that people will have to pay potentially?
No.
And so is that the company eating the price, or is it they figured it out?
For the moment, they're eating the price.
Do you have a general sense of how much more it costs?
No, I don't. Not yet. They've re-engineered 10% of their portfolio, 18 items.
Got it.
And 3 of them are on the market in Kuwait today.
So extrapolating this now to something I brought up to you earlier, and just a heads up, we probably about 15 minutes to 6, and I know you have a time constraint. When you look at what Michelle Obama is trying to do, and I believe that she's coming from, regardless of people, I've had Callie Means on this podcast before,
right?
And he has a lot of very strong opinions, and he gets me fired up.
Callie's absolutely right.
Right?
I love Callie. He is wonderful, and he worked in the
He knows
system.
the behind the scenes. He sees the system. He knows the food industry will use racism and any other tool that's available to push this whole personal responsibility angle.
And I watched it.
So he would say on Twitter that there's no healthy amount of added sugar. And I'm trying to hold that sort of understanding of things with this other side, which is, Dr. Robert Lustig, who says that I'm not a purist, I'm a realist. And so I understand that people are going to still be addicted to sugar. And so in the case of Michelle Obama, and I don't know the total carbohydrate amount, I can pull it up here in a second, but I think it's like 10% added sugar that's inside of that, right? Yeah. And so give us your nuanced thoughts on something like that approach with her new drink company. I think you said it was called Plessy.
Plessy. I am not for it.
You're not for it?
I am not for it. No.
Even though you feel that people have to make changes in strides?
I think that it's a interesting concept, but a lousy execution. I don't see how this is going to actually change the dynamic, and I don't see how it's going to change the disease burden of children and or the rest of America. Mm-hmm. I don't see it.
Even if their goal is to get people off of sweetened soft drinks, and I'm not saying I know the right answer.
Well,
right?
They're not, because they're using artificial sweeteners, which have their own problems. Now, allulose might have problems, but no one's found them yet. So I'm betting that because of allulose's structure, because of its kinetics, because of its pharmacodynamics that we do know about, and because of the empiric studies that have been done, that is a better sweetener extender. Plessy's not using that. Plessy's using erythritol and other
I think that they're using some stevia and monk fruit as part of it. Right. I don't know if I'm only looking at one nutritional label.
Right. Just remember that you put something sweet on the tongue. Mm-hmm. Message goes tongue to brain, sugar's coming. Message goes brain to pancreas, sugar's coming, release the insulin. Mm-hmm. But then the sugar never comes because it was a diet sweetener. The pancreas still releases the insulin. We have the data to show that. And that's true for stevia and monk fruit too. Does not seem to be true for allulose. Mm-hmm. So I don't know whether or not this will be the right formulation. We need data, we need science to tell us. Thus far, I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
So I think it's a little bit ill-advised.
And I just want to say for the record, I might have gotten the breakdown incorrect because I'm looking at their website and it says no added sugar.
Right.
It says no added sugar, 2 grams of fiber, real fruit juice. Again, we're just using this
Well, real fruit juice means
fructose.
Sugar.
And the total amount of carbohydrates is 9 grams, 2 grams of dietary fiber, and total sugars is 6 grams. You know, I look at this and I would say that, again, I have no connection with them. I have no connection with the campaign and other things. I'm generally an independent when it comes to politics, socially leaning liberal, you know, fiscally leaning, maybe probably conservative. And I have a lot of nuanced thoughts about a lot of things.
Whatever happened to the social liberal fiscal conservatives? What happened to them?
I don't know.
That's me too.
Yeah. So I would say, you know, naturally anybody who's a public figure like Michelle Obama is going to get a lot of criticism. And I generally think that they expected that. She has a lot of advisors. And at the end of the day, she probably has a bigger why that's driving her. And then let the chips fall where they may, and she can get a chance to see. But I see a lot of sort of, you know, this is healthier than a lot of, I want to say this for just the record, this is healthier than a lot of acai bowls that I see people giving to kids. Yeah. It's healthier than a lot of green juies that have a ton of sugar that's added to them. People have green juice that has more, you know, again, I don't want everybody drinking this Plezzy drink that's out there. I like the discussion, right? And I think our audience also likes the discussion too, because so much, once you get excited about changing your own health, once you get excited about significantly reducing sugar, you naturally think about how we can make a difference in society as well too, which is why a lot of people are thinking about this question.
Unfortunately, Michelle Obama has a lousy track record in this. You know, she started Let's Move in 2010. And if you go on YouTube right now, you can see the very first speech she gave to the Grocery Manufacturers Association, the GMA, in 2010. She was in a pink dress, sleeveless, of course. And she pointed her finger directly at them and said, "This is your problem, and you have to fix it. And you have to get the sugar out of kids' diets." She never said it again.
Because she got so much criticism.
From her own administration.
From her own administration, but I also saw a lot of conservatives, again, not to make this a left and right.
Because it's about calories.
How dare you, nanny state, this is Michelle Obama. Probably a lot of that sort of washed in sort of, who does she think she is?
And because it was calories and personal responsibility.
Yeah.
Okay. The point is, by 2012, Michelle Obama was only talking about exercise.
Yeah.
Let's Move became Let's Move. So I'm going to withhold judgment.
Yeah. So we'll watch and we'll wait and see. But I appreciate you at least getting into the dialogue. Again, I'm watching just like everybody else, and people are having a conversation. At the end of the day, a lot of people have said, you know, change doesn't start in Congress, and you could probably add former administration to that as well. It starts in the public. It starts with podcasts. It starts with people changing what media they're focused on, and they're tuning off the TV and they're turning on something else, and they're getting access to different information.
Drew, why do you think I'm here?
Which I super appreciate, right? Let's leave people with a couple of action items before you depart. Okay.
Eat real food.
Eat real food.
Eat real food. Food that came out of the ground, or animals that ate the food that came out of the ground. That's a great way to start.
And if somebody was significantly cutting added sugar out of their diet, right? And they're pulling back from rolling the dice of what can happen when you have a lot of sugar in your diet, and they're getting away from ultra processed foods, and hopefully they're exercising as well too. Right. What would they typically see also on their blood work at, let's say, like 30 days and 90 days?
The most important test that their doctor can draw on them, they're not drawing. It's a fasting insulin level.
That's one of the top tests. That's literally one of the top tests. The top test.
The top test. You're a levels advisor. I'm a levels advisor. I help them construct Labs 2.0. And Labs 2.0 is 5 tests. Fasting insulin, hemoglobin A1C, uric acid, serum triglycerides, and ApoB. And the reason is because all of them tell you about mitochondrial dysfunction. They don't tell you about obesity. They tell you about mitochondrial dysfunction. Fasting insulin is the single most important test to look for mitochondrial dysfunction. If your fasting insulin is above 10, you have it. If your fasting insulin is above 15, you have it bad. That's a great way to start. Now,
and optimal, would you say, is 5 or less?
5 or less is fantastic. If you're a marathon runner, you have a 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm about a 3.
Oh, well, why am I surprised? Of course you are. The point is that the American Diabetes Association tells doctors don't draw fasting insulin.
Why is that?
2 reasons. First, fasting insulin levels are not standardized across platforms. So different assays give
So you could
different
run at
results.
Quest and it could be different than running it at another company.
Right. And the reason is because some assays pick up proinsulin in the insulin assay.
Oh, I didn't know
Proinsulin
this.
is a precursor to insulin. When your pancreas is stressed and it's trying to put out everything it can, it will put out proinsulin too. And proinsulin will be picked up in the insulin assay. So you're not actually measuring insulin. That's true. I don't disagree with that. Point is, it's high. That's what matters. And if it's high, you got a problem.
Right.
So draw it anyway.
Draw it anyway. It's a cheap test.
And
Right.
then you can use that number to follow whether the patient gets better. You have a benchmark for whether the patient gets better. So that's specious reason number 1.
Yeah. One actionable thing everybody can do today: go to your doctor, ask nicely, and get
Get a
this test.
fasting
It's
insulin.
not that expensive.
Right.
Tell them why you care about that.
Right.
Give them a copy of your book if they're open to it.
That's a good idea.
Right?
The second reason the ADA says don't draw it is because fasting insulin levels do not correlate with obesity. That's correct. They correlate with metabolic health.
Right. You can have those skinny tofu people
Exactly.
who still have a high fasting insulin,
There you go.
but are not by BMI standards overweight.
So both reasons wrong. Get the fasting insulin.
It almost feels like just an entire organization that's main goal is to drive a national awareness around fasting insulin would be a good idea.
Hey, let's start it.
Hey, I'm game. I'll put some money towards that. Let's go. Amazing. Eat real food.
Eat real food, get a fasting insulin, okay, and exercise and sleep.
Yeah.
I mean, sleep's a big problem in this
huge.
country,
It's huge.
okay? And it's not just because you're fat.
Yeah.
It's because of the thing in your pocket.
Too much screen time, phone
Too much
distraction.
screen time. Yep.
Yeah. Take your sleep seriously.
Yep. Take your sleep seriously. Take your sleep as seriously as you do your diet. So I'm going to just lay it out there. I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm just going to, tell you the 2 words, the 2 dirtiest words in the English language: processed food. Okay. And then I'm going to tell you the 1 dirtiest 4-letter word in the English language: Iowa. And that's all you need to know. In fact, processed food is not food. That's what it comes down to. And I say that very specifically based on the definition. So, what is the definition of food? If you go to the dictionary, which I did, here's the definition: substrate that contributes to either the growth or burning of an organism. I have no problem with that definition. That's a fine definition. The growth or burning of an organism. All right? Now, processed food is high sugar, low fiber. Real food is low sugar, high fiber. So let's talk about what food is, what processed food is, and whether or not processed food actually meets this definitional criterion. So let's talk about burning first. Turns out sugar, this molecule that we all love, we all seek, which actually is addictive in 20% of the population, just the same as alcohol. Turns out fructose, when you burn it in a bomb calorimeter, gives you 4 calories per gram. Same as protein, same as other carbohydrates. But we're not bomb calorimeters. In fact, fructose, when you consume it, actually inhibits burning. It inhibits mitochondrial function, the little energy burning factories inside all our cells. It inhibits our ability to take substrate and turn it into chemical energy called ATP. Now, The mitochondria's job is to generate ATP. That's what powers all of our cells. If you're not making ATP, that means you're dead. It's just that simple. On, off. Either you make ATP or you don't. The point is that when you're metabolically healthy, you make ATP well. When you're metabolically ill, you make ATP poorly because of mitochondrial dysfunction, because your mitochondria aren't working well. Turns out fructose inhibits mitochondrial function. Now, the other carbohydrate, the other simple sugar, the one that we measure in our bloodstream, the one that everyone talks about, is glucose. Now, glucose is the energy of life. No argument. Every cell on the planet burns glucose for energy. Glucose is so goddamn important that if you don't consume it, your body makes it. A process called gluconeogenesis. So fat will turn into glucose in your liver. Amino acids will turn into glucose in your liver. People who eat no carbohydrate at all, people on the ultimate ketogenic diet, if you will, okay, still have a serum glucose level. And the reason is because their liver will take the fat and the protein and turn it into glucose. That's how important glucose is. All right? Glucose, for lack of a better word, is essential. But it's not essential to consume it. It's essential to have it, but it's not essential to consume it because your body will make it. Now, fructose, on the other hand, is a whole nother ballgame because there's no biochemical reaction in any vertebrate cell, any animal cell on the planet that requires dietary fructose for functioning. And it turns out that fructose is a mitochondrial toxin. And the reason is because it inhibits three separate enzymes in mitochondria. And here they are for the science crowd. Number one, it inhibits AMP kinase. AMP kinase is the fuel gauge on the liver cell. It's the enzyme that tells your cell you need more energy. And it's also the enzyme that generates more mitochondria, mitochondrial biogenesis. So if you inhibit AMP kinase, basically you're telling your cells you don't need to make energy. Number two, it inhibits an enzyme called ACAD-L, ACAD-L, acyl-CoA dehydrogenase long chain. This is an enzyme that starts the process of cutting fatty acids into fragments for beta oxidation, which is basically what ketogenesis is. All right, is being able to use ketones for beta oxidation. Well, you have to make those 2 carbon fragments to make the ketones. And so ACAD-L is essential for that. So if you inhibit that, that means you're inhibiting beta oxidation. And finally, number 3, it inhibits the enzyme through uric acid, and we will talk about uric acid, no doubt, because it's hot topic with Rick Johnson's book, Nature Wanted Us to Be Fat, and David Perlmutter's Drop Acid, all coming out within a week of each other. So, on the tip of everyone's metabolic tongue right now. Okay, because fructose increases uric acid inhibits the third enzyme in the mitochondria called CPT1, carnitine palmitoyl transferase 1. This is the enzyme that regenerates the shuttle mechanism called carnitine that allows fatty acids to be imported into the mitochondria so that they can be beta oxidized. So if you're slowing down mitochondrial function, you're inhibiting the ability to generate ketones for beta oxidation, and you're inhibiting the ability to even import those ketones or fatty acids into the mitochondria for beta oxidation. Guess what? You end up with less ATP. So fructose inhibits burning. Glucose stimulates it, fructose inhibits it. Okay, So that's burning. Now let's do growth. Turns out my colleague, Dr. Efrat Monsenigo Ornan, who is the head of the Department of Nutrition at Hebrew University, Jerusalem, just published 3 papers showing that processed food, and specifically fructose, inhibits skeletal growth. It inhibits long bone growth. It inhibits cortical bone growth. And we also have data to show that fructose actually hijacks the growth mechanism to generate cancer. So, bottom line, fructose does not lead to growth. It basically hijacks growth to autonomous growth rather than regulated growth. So, if you're not burning and you're not growing, are you a food? So, sugar, and thereby proxy, processed food, is not food. So if you're consuming not food, what do you think's going to happen to you? And that's how diet went off the rails 50 years ago. And that's what's wrong.
Well, I know it's obvious, but sometimes the things that are obvious don't fully connect in people's minds until they hear it. What is happening? What are you seeing out there when it comes to the most common diseases that this whole interplay that you just covered connects to?
Well, there are 8 diseases, 8 chronic metabolic diseases. They existed before 50 years ago, but they have jumped in prevalence so severely that these 8, when you group them and conglomerate them, now account for 75% of all healthcare costs in the United States. And I'll name them. Here they are: type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, fatty liver disease, polycystic ovarian disease. These are mitochondrial diseases. The point is that there is not one of those diseases was a child's disease. And now they're all child diseases. We never saw type 2 diabetes in a child before. And now 1 out of every 3 new diabetes diagnoses in children is type 2. Fatty liver disease was the disease of alcohol. And now 5-year-olds have fatty liver disease. Children are the canaries in the coal mine. Children are getting the diseases of alcohol. Children are getting the diseases of aging. Children are getting the diseases of mitochondrial dysfunction when they never did before. How come? Because they're eating processed food. Processed food is a relatively recent invention. Started after World War II because we started subsidizing commodities during the first Farm Bill, 1933, with the Depression and the Dust Bowl. And World War II basically figured out how to process food and deliver it en masse to, the army. And then we, realized we could make money doing this. And it was good for waste because, it increased shelf life. And so we went into mass production mode of processed food. And that's when the chronic metabolic diseases started, rearing their ugly head and started being seen in children. So there was no such thing as fatty liver disease until 1980 in anyone. Today, 45% of American adults have fatty liver disease and 25% of children, when this wasn't even a disease before. So you got to look to say, all right, what happened? And the bottom line is processed food happened.
To take that analogy a little bit further, you also write in your book that you're calling these diseases, but in a way, these top 8 that you just listed, they're not actually diseases. Now,
That's right.
Tell us why. Take it to the next level and help us understand that.
That's right. So these are the diseases that have ICD-11 codes. These are the diseases that doctors learn about in medical school. I know because I'm a doctor and I learned about them in medical school. But in fact, these diseases are actually symptoms of disease. The high LDL is not the disease, it's the symptom of the disease. The high blood pressure is not the disease, it's the symptom of the disease. The high blood glucose is not the disease, it's the symptom of the disease. The high uric acid is not the disease, it's the symptom of the disease. All of these are manifestations of dysfunction of cells in our bodies. And that's the disease, these abnormal pathologies that have basically sprung up and are being, have overtaken our general metabolism. In my book, back here, Metabolical, I list the 8 subcellular pathologies that actually belie all of these chronic diseases. So, number 1, glycation. Number 2, oxidative stress. Number 3, mitochondrial dysfunction, which we've been talking about. Number 4, insulin resistance. Number 5, membrane instability. Number 6, inflammation. Number 7, methylation. Number 8, autophagy. Now, there is no ICD-11 code for any of those. Doctors don't get reimbursed for any of those. Doctors don't know what they are because they're not taught in medical school. Doctors don't know how to teach patients what they are because why would you bring something up in a doctor-patient conversation when you don't have any answers for them? So like, why would you bother? So the doctors don't know, the patients don't know. And it turns out those 8 that I just mentioned belie all of those other chronic metabolic diseases. They are the ultimate manifestations of these 8 subcellular dysfunctions. In the book, I call them the hateful or grateful 8. When these 8 processes are working right, you'll be 110 playing tennis. When they're working wrong, you'll be 40 years old in a wheelchair with 2 stumps on dialysis waiting for your next stroke. And of course, everything in between. So fixing those 8 subcellular pathologies is what metabolic health is all about. The question is, how do you do it? How do you fix those 8? And the answer is, you got to look at the pathways. You got to look at the pathogenesis of each of those 8. My colleague at Touro University and I, Dr. Alejandro Gugliucci, and I put together a poster that you can get online. It's from Biotechny. Basically, it's the entire of metabolic syndrome on one poster with all the different organs and all the different intermediary pathways that are involved. And when you actually look at all of these inherent pathways that are going on inside cells, you come to a stark realization. There are no drugs for this. These 8 processes are not druggable. They are foodable. There's food to fix them. So food can either cause them or food can fix them. So this is where I actually get mad about the food is medicine movement. Real food is medicine. Processed food is poison. When you just say food is medicine, you're missing the point. It's the food that made the disease in the first place. So you have to understand that processed food is not food. And once you get that into your head, once you understand that Cheetos is not food, then all things are possible. But that's a heavy lift for a lot of people.
It's a heavy lift but it's one of the most important lifts because the law of responsibility says if something created it, or if you had a hand in creating it, doesn't mean that it's your fault, doesn't mean that you're to blame, but if you had a hand in creating it, then you can have a hand in uncreating it. And so that's the most empowering thing, truly, as burdensome as it is. And people sometimes feel the weight of, so you're telling me this chronic disease that I've been suffering with is something that I've done. It's not just in my genetics, or it's not just because we didn't have some miracle drug that's there, but that could be the best news ever because that means that we can do something about it.
Right. Well, so that actually brings us to two separate tangents, and we'll have to explore both at the same time. Yes, that's true. And I agree with that yes, you have a hand in being able to fix it, that you are a victim, not a perpetrator. All right. And that, but you still have to be in partnership with your doctor in order to be able to mitigate the risk. I agree with that. All right. You can't expect somehow, to snap your fingers and have it all go away. All right. You got into this boat. You got to get out of the boat. And you have to know, if you drive into a ditch, you have to know how you drove into the ditch in order to be able to drive back out. If you try to drive through the ditch, all you do is spin your wheels and end up further in the ditch. All right. So understanding the pathogenesis and understanding how you got there is absolutely essential to fixing the problem. So that's why I wrote Metabolical, is to explain how we got there and why and what's going on. So yes, we all need to play our role. And the only way to do that is with education, understanding what our contribution is. Agreed. Having said that, the immediate corollary to that is, well, if I can fix the problem, then I must have free will to do so. And the question is that true? Do you have free will? And this is obviously a very big philosophical question that many philosophers, over many years have, tried to glom onto, anything all the way from Calvin to Einstein and many people in between. There's a biologist, head of the Department of Biology at the University of Pennsylvania, named Anthony Cashmore, who wrote a paper in PNAS several years ago that I just think is the best paper ever written. And it's called The Lucretian Swerve. And it basically talks about free will as a method for being able to punish perpetrators, that we had to invent free will to justify being able to have a criminal justice system. All right. And that's the reason why there's free will. Not because it's innate or inherent, but because it gives us the license to be able to punish perpetrators. And what he does is he says that ultimately free will is a combination of your DNA, which you can't fix, and your environment, which you can fix, and some random stochastic processes thrown on top, which are random and stochastic and basically uninterpretable, and you can't prepare for them. So they're sort of out in limbo too. So that means that the only thing you can fix is your environment. So the question is, yes, you have free will to fix your environment. Sure, but it's your environment that's the problem. And you didn't contribute to that. Your environment happened to you. So today we're talking about the environment of our food supply, our processed food supply, our industrialized, profit-making processed food supply. And how the hell did that happen? And who let them get away with all of this? So while, yes, we have some agency, we have some ability to fix our environment, not everybody does. Lower socioeconomic status people can't fix their environment, if there's no grocery store within 10 miles of their home, if all they have are convenience stores, and they live in food deserts, how are they supposed to fix it? All right. Children, they only get to eat what's brought into the house. Is it their fault? How are they supposed to fix it? So, in order to be able to understand these vulnerable populations, prisoners, another example, they don't get to choose their food, right? And they are metabolically ill like all get out. So in order to be able to understand these vulnerable populations, babies, newborns, we have an epidemic of obese newborns because we have an epidemic of obese fetuses. Okay, they don't diet and exercise. So we have to understand the role the environment plays. And that's what I focus on, is how did the environment shift our metabolism? And what can we do to shift our environment back so that we can actually be healthy?
It's a powerful question. And as you've so diligently showed with your work, the right question sets us up for where to look. But if we're asking the wrong question, we're looking in the wrong direction.
And we've been looking in the wrong direction for 50 years.
And that's what I was going to get to, is give us some of the questions. The subtitle of the book is The Lore and the Lies of Processed Food, Nutrition, and Modern Medicine. Give us a few examples of the questions that either the processed food industry or that modern medicine was asking that led them down to different but parallel paths.
So let's start with myth number 1. Okay. And this is the myth that has to be debunked. Until this one is debunked, nothing good will ever come. Right? This is the nugget of truth. We got to start here. It's with this notion that a calorie is a calorie. Food industry says it's about calories. It's about energy balance. It's about calories in, calories out. Therefore, it's about 2 behaviors, gluttony and sloth. Therefore, because it's about 2 behaviors, if you're fat, it's your fault. Therefore, diet and exercise. Therefore, any calorie can be part of a balanced diet. Therefore, don't pick on our calories, go pick on somebody else's calories. All right? All of that comes from this notion that calories are fungible. That it doesn't matter what you eat, it matters how much you eat. That's basically what they say. And they say that that's personal responsibility. So what they've done in one fell swoop with one concept is put the onus on the victim and assuage their own culpability. Works for them. The question is it true? Is a calorie a calorie? And the answer is we have so much data to show that this is the biggest lie in the history of medicine. I'm from New York. I'm from Brooklyn, so I use a lot of, shall we say, colorful language. And this is the single piece of BS.
You can curse on our podcast. That's fine.
It's a family podcast. I got to be careful. I can't tell you how big a piece of, this is bigger, okay, than Randy Marsh's poop in South Park. That's how big it is. Right. It is so wrong. It was wrong from the day it was conceived, and it will be wrong till the day we finally trash it. And the problem is the food industry won't give it up. And the reason they won't give it up is because it's their protection. It's their gravy train. They have convinced us all that it is true, and it is not true. It is the biggest lie there ever was. So we got to start there. So how can I prove it's a lie? All right, I'll prove it's a lie 4 ways. 4 different foodstuffs. Let's start with almonds. Drew, you like almonds?
Love them.
Love them. Almonds are great. Okay. But almonds are relatively high density, in terms of calories, aren't they?
They are.
So you eat 160 calories in almonds. Okay. Handful of almonds. 160 calories in almonds. How many of those calories do you absorb?
Good question.
Turns out the answer is 130. You ate 160, you absorbed 130. Where'd the other 30 go?
The metabolic processes of
No.
no.
The fiber in the almonds, and there are 2 kinds of fiber, and this becomes very important because remember I talked high sugar, low fiber, low sugar, high fiber, right? The fiber in the almonds, and there's 2 kinds, soluble and insoluble. So soluble fiber is like pectins and inulin, like what holds jelly together, hydrogels. Insoluble fiber is like cellulose, the stringy stuff in celery. Okay. Almonds have both. The stringy stuff sets up a lattice work on the inside of the duodenum like a fishnet. And the soluble fiber are globular. They plug the holes in the fishnet. And together they form an impenetrable barrier. You can actually see it on electron microscopy, a whitish secondary barrier that inhibits the absorption of simple sugars, glucose, fructose, sucrose, simple starches, in the duodenum so that they do not go via the portal vein to reach the liver and then overwhelm the liver, so that the liver stays healthy. You are protecting the liver with the fiber in the almonds. So the liver doesn't get the excess, in which case then it would turn the excess into fat through this process called de novo lipogenesis, new fat making, which is what fructose does in particular. And you don't generate an insulin response because you didn't generate a serum glucose response. Okay, this all has to do with the concept of glycemic load to keep the insulin down. Okay, and that keeps you metabolically healthy because insulin's the bad guy in the story. Insulin drives chronic metabolic disease because insulin drives growth, abnormal growth. It drives vascular smooth muscle growth. That's why you get coronary artery disease. It drives prostate and breast growth. That's why you get breast and prostate cancer because of the insulin. Well, okay, so you didn't generate as big an insulin response because you didn't absorb those calories. So where'd those 30 calories go? They went further down the intestine to the next part called the jejunum. Okay, and the jejunum, that's where the bacteria are. That's where the microbiome is. So those bacteria, they want those 30 calories. And so they chew it up for their own purposes. So you have 10 trillion cells in your body. You have 100 trillion bacteria in your intestine. They outnumber you 10 to 1. You are just a big bag of bacteria with legs. Okay, those bacteria have to eat something to stay alive. Well, what do they eat? Well, they eat what you eat. The question is, how much did you get versus how much did they get? And when you consume those almonds, you consumed it with fiber, and that fiber meant that those 30 calories weren't for you. They were for your microbiome. So even though you ate them, even though they passed your lips, even though they registered as a calorie eaten, they were not a calorie absorbed. So who cares how many calories you ate? You care about how many calories you absorb. Well, is that measured in a calorie is a calorie? No. So a calorie is not a calorie because if it came with fiber, that calorie wasn't for you. Number 2, protein. Okay, so protein is made up of amino acids. And there are 20 amino acids, right? Some of them are essential amino acids. You have to consume them. Some of them your body can make from those essential amino acids. But there are 20 amino acids. Now, if you are building muscle, you need those amino acids because muscle is primarily protein, actin, myosin, etc. All right? So bodybuilders who are building muscle, they take scoops of protein powder and put it in their Vitamix to make their smoothies, right? Okay, and they're building muscle, and so they need those amino acids because they're essential. They have to consume them. But what if you're not a bodybuilder? What if you're a mere mortal like me? And what if you consume excess protein, excess amino acids? What if you ended up going to, the steakhouse and you ordered that porterhouse for two and you ate the whole thing yourself? Okay, now what? Where is the protein going to go? Is there a storehouse for protein? And the answer is, yeah, your muscle. But if you're not building muscle, then that's not your storehouse. So what happens to the excess? What happened to the other half of the porterhouse? Well, it went to the liver. The amino acids went to the liver. The liver has to turn it into energy. So the liver has to take the amino group off the amino acid, a deamination. Now, once that happens, that amino acid now becomes an organic acid. That organic acid can now enter the Krebs cycle, which is the cycle that makes the ATP. And so you can generate energy from that amino acid once it's deamidated. Turns out that process of deamination, taking that amino group off, costs energy. Okay, it costs energy, and it costs twice as much energy as what your liver has to do to prepare carbohydrate for burning. So there's a net deficit for protein versus carbohydrate when you are turning it into ATP. So even though protein and carbohydrate are both 4 calories per gram, when you're burning protein, you actually generate fewer ATPs than when you're burning carbohydrate. Therefore, calorie is not a calorie because you started with the same number of calories in bomb calorimeter, but you ended up with different level numbers of ATPs. Number 3, fats. So over here on this side, we have omega-3 fatty acids. Heart healthy, anti-inflammatory, anti-Alzheimer's, save your life, anti-depression. Okay, single best thing you can put in your body, without question, omega-3s. Over here we have trans fats, the devil incarnate. Okay, consumable poison, made in the lab. The reason that we put the trans fats in the food was because the bacteria couldn't break the trans double bond because it didn't have the enzyme, the desaturase, to do it. So the bacteria couldn't grow on it. That's why we had the 10-year-old Twinkie. All right? Point is, our mitochondria in our cells are refurbished bacteria. They even have their own bacterial DNA. Well, guess what? Our mitochondria can't break that bond either. So when you consume trans fats, you are basically laying down poison in your liver and in your arteries because you can't break it all the way down to carbon dioxide and ATP because of that trans double bond. So you do not want those trans double bonds in your diet, but the food industry put them there. Again, another reason why processed food is poison. All right, the point is, over here we got omega-3s, over here we got trans fats. They're both 9 calories per gram. One will save your life, one will kill you. Because a calorie is not a calorie. Because different foodstuffs have different functions. And then lastly, my favorite, the one we started with, fructose and glucose. Glucose is the energy of life, and fructose is poison. It's a chronic dose-dependent mitochondrial toxin. They're both 4 calories per gram. So it's not how much you eat. It's specifically what your body does with what you eat that matters. And that just blows the whole concept of calories right out of the water. So we got to start with that. That's where the food industry got on, and that's where we have to get off. Problem is, food industry is still hitting it as hard as they possibly can, because this is the concept that keeps them out of court.
Right.
Now, you and I have both eaten ice cream before, and
Yep.
you and I have both had sugar occasionally as part of our diet, dark chocolate, whatever it might be. Even maybe, I don't drink sodas, but I will drink a natural quote unquote soda, which still would
got
have
plenty.
some added sugars inside
Oh,
of
yeah.
it, like a Olipop, It's,
Yeah.
it's not something
Yeah.
that I'm drinking every day, but it's something that I'll drink.
Yep.
And I think that people are asking the question, which is, what percentage, just to think of it this way, I know it's not just about calories, but what percentage of our diet can still contain, let's start first with ultra processed foods, right? Again, ultra processed, right? Which is different than processed, because
Right.
processed is everything. Everything's processed
Well, to some extent.
to
yes.
some extent,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But what is, if you were giving recommendation, or if you were the health czar in America and the president's coming to you and saying, all right, we need some recommendations for what percentage of calories in people's diets can come from ultra processed foods, you would say what?
That's a tough question. Here's what I can say. Every percent increase in ultra-processed foods increases risk of cancer by 1.2% and diabetes by 1.5%. So I can't give you a threshold. I can just give you sort of the risk factor for doing it. I can't tell you specifically, oh yeah, stay below 10% ultra-processed foods and you'll be fine. Or stay below 30% ultra-processed foods and you won't get disease or anything like that. I can't do that because I don't know any study that's actually, quantitated that in
And we
that
don't know the
way.
full
I don't
impact
know.
of ultra processed foods and their combination of their concentrated forms of delivering glyphosate to people,
Right.
their concentrated forms of delivering PFAs to people, and
Indeed.
these other obesogens that you were talking about.
That's right.
So you would be saying that, look, any significant amount of ultra processed food in the diet, you're rolling the dice.
That's
You're gambling.
Exactly right. You are gambling. Now, some people, maybe the gamble will pay off. But in general, you're going to end up in trouble. And the question is, by that time, it'll be too late. So you have to make a conscious decision now, today, whether or not the risk is worth it and whether or not the expense is worth it. So the expense is two kinds of expense. The expense to your health and the expense to your wallet. And the way I always put it is, you can either pay the farmer or the doctor. But ultimately, you're going to pay.
Yeah. And so let's now take it to sugar. And going back to our original sort of question where we were asking about what amount of sugar, because again, you and I both will have some sugar inside of our diet, even in the form of, we're not just talking about fruits, which you've talked about the benefits of having whole fruits in your diet,
Right.
but we might go out and we might have some ice cream occasionally.
Yeah,
We
sure.
might have something that's
Yeah.
there.
It's
adage-
not what you do on one day. It's what you do every day.
So even in every day, because I think a lot of people get confused still, because generally, if you go to Times Square and you
Mhm.
interview most people and you
Yep.
say, are you eating healthy? Pretty much everybody's going to say yes, because they all, I only have 5 soft drinks a day. My cousin has a
Only. Yeah.
whole liter,
Right.
right? So I'm doing better than them.
As they
So-
walk into Nathan's. Yeah.
as they walk into Nathan's. Or, are you healthy? Yeah, I only smoke 1 cigarette a day, right? Because that's their definition of healthy compared to the people that they spend time with. So I actually think there's a lot of people that are listening that are like actually genuinely confused when they're looking at nutritional labels and the food that they're eating. Is there a threshold, since our government isn't putting any sort of values of what is the total amount of sugar? And this has become a big debate because right now, going back to, you were mentioning the Obama White House and Sam Katz, right?
Sam Katz, yeah.
He's now an advisor on a new drink that's been launched by Michelle Obama.
I'm aware. Plessy.
I
got it.
And there's a lot of debate on Twitter that people are having because it has 10% of its sugar is added sugar, I believe.
Right.
And I'll fact check that and put it inside of the show notes.
Right.
And there's people that are attacking, Michelle Obama, former First Lady, as well as Sam, as well as Emily Oyster, who's part of it, an advisor. And they're saying there should be no added sugar that's being recommended to people.
Right.
And they're coming from a standpoint, and you've written about this. You actually put a whole study about this out there that we actually, if we're going to, and correct me if I'm wrong in the sort of how I'm portraying this, we have to make processed foods healthier.
Right.
If we are going to be realistic in getting people to change.
Right.
So and that's a lot of stuff that I brought up. But let's first start off with the sugar thing, Drew, and then I want to get your thoughts on Plessy.
Drew, you're so absolutely correct. At every level. Okay. So let me first explain to the audience.
Yes.
I am not a purist.
Mm-hmm.
I am a practicalist. I'm a pragmatist. We can't get rid of processed food. As much as I hate it, we just can't. And the reason we can't is because we have to feed 10 billion people by the year 2050. And how the hell are we going to do that? There's not enough land and ocean.
And would you also say that you feel that same way about sugar? Added sugar in the diet?
So let me explain.
Please, yes, sorry.
What I know and what we've done. And this will be the entree for that. Okay. Sugar is a chronic, dose-dependent mitochondrial toxin.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way alcohol is. And for the same reasons, because after all, where do you get alcohol from? Fermentation of sugar. It's called wine. We do it Napa Sonoma every day. The big difference between alcohol and sugar is that for alcohol, the yeast does the first step called glycolysis. By the way, same as anaerobic metabolism. Same as cancer. And for sugar, we do our own first step. But after that, what gets presented to the mitochondria are exactly the same, whether it's alcohol or sugar. So it shouldn't surprise us that children today get the two diseases of alcohol, type 2 diabetes and fatty liver disease, without alcohol. Because sugar is the alcohol of the child. And I have written that many times.
Yeah, you've said in previous interviews that when you were in med school, if you saw fatty liver disease, you knew that person was alcoholic.
Absolutely.
Now today, you're seeing all sorts of people, especially kids, who have fatty liver.
5-year-olds.
And they've never touched alcohol.
Exactly. 5-year-olds with fatty liver disease. And fatty liver disease is now the leading cause of liver transplant. So, yes. Kids are now basically getting the diseases of alcohol because sugar is metabolized like alcohol. Does that mean they should go cold turkey and never touch the stuff? And the answer is, well, we have a threshold for alcohol. How many drinks a day can you consume before your health goes down the tubes?
I mean, this is an area that's hotly debated.
Yes. So how many?
Well, if you listen to Andrew Huberman's last episode that he did, not last episode, but it was, I think, the second most listened to podcast last year on alcohol, is that, he would say that there's no level of alcohol that doesn't do some form of damage on the body.
It's true.
I guess the government's recommendation, I've seen things for women that it's like 2 drinks a day?
One.
1
for women, 2 for men.
Okay.
That's sort of the upper limit.
Yeah.
Okay. 1 drink will get you about 25 grams of alcohol. Well,
Is that a beer or is that?
No, that's
hard liquor?
Yeah,
or wine?
That's more like wine.
Okay, got
Glass of wine. Beer's a little lower. Beer's about 105 calories, 3.5% alcohol. Wine's about 140 calories, more like 8 to 14% alcohol, depending on whether it's white or, a bold red. Okay, so, but the point is, you won't do a lot of damage. There's no amount of alcohol that's good for you. That's what we've learned. We used to think, one drink a day actually is good for your liver.
Right, but then if you
That turned
haven't
out to not
started,
be true.
don't start, is what they would say,
That's
which was always so confusing.
That's true. That's true. But the question is, when does the cumulative damage start?
Right.
And Huberman's right that there's no amount that's good for you. That's true.
Right.
But it's when does the cumulative damage start? And the answer is around one drink.
One drink. More than one drink a day.
More than one drink, you're going to have problems.
Yeah.
Okay? All right. Our livers have an innate capacity to metabolize alcohol. Our livers have an innate capacity to metabolize fructose at about the same level for the same reason. So how much fructose can you consume? The answer is about 25 grams of sugar, so half of that being fructose. So about 12 grams of fructose, 25 grams of sugar.
And how much is in...
that's about 6 teaspoons of added sugar per day. For the whole day.
6 teaspoons of added sugar for a whole day.
For a whole day.
And if you look at like a can of traditional sugar-sweetened soda.
Okay. That is 10 teaspoons.
So already you have 10 teaspoons of sugar in just one can of soda.
So half a can of soda, and that's it for the day.
And you're already over.
And then you're already over.
You have 10 instead of 6.
Right. Because we have a limited capacity to metabolize it. People don't understand that. People think, well, it's just calories. Nope. It's sugar. Okay? There are acute poisons that will kill you in parts per billion, keel over and die, like cyanide or, ricin or sarin or VX gas. All right? There are intermediate toxins where you need a little bit more and perhaps a little longer exposure, like, for instance, carbon tetrachloride or benzene or tobacco smoke. And then there are relatively weak toxins, like alcohol and sugar, where it's probably not one day's worth of exposure that's going to kill you. It's going to require 10 years to 30 years of exposure. And it's not one cigarette or one immediate, exposure. It's going to be multiple chronic exposures, but ultimately it's going to kill you. And the question is, when you get to that point, will you say to yourself, well, I had a good life and I enjoyed my sugar? Or are you going to say, what the hell did I do? You can only make that decision if you have the knowledge. And we are being kept from that knowledge, very specifically by the food industry, because they don't want you to know.
And it's not like you're saying that you just wake up one day and you die 10 years early, because there's a lot of people that say, you know what, if it's a longer life or I get to, live to eat, and sure, I'm going to have a little bit more sugar and alcohol and other things, but they forget the fact that chronic disease is painful as fuck.
It sure is.
Diabetes is painful.
Absolutely.
Alzheimer's is painful.
Absolutely.
You don't just wake up one day and die peacefully a little earlier. You suffer for years.
15.
I mean,
15.
That sounds like a good case scenario
Average.
from
Average.
the people that I've seen.
That's how much reduction in health span we see.
Not to mention your cognitive
syndrome.
Performance going down.
That's part of it. Yeah.
Your energy going down. Like,
Yeah.
I have sugar in my life. Like, I will have an ice cream here and there or a component, but I treat it kind of like I did growing up when my family moved here, is that it wasn't in the home. It was an occasional thing that we had to go outside of the home for.
Right.
And it wasn't a regular part of my diet, minus like dark chocolate and fruits and other things, which we're not really talking about.
Look, when sugar was a condiment, we did not have this problem. But sugar became a diet staple. And now we do have this problem. So here's another way to look at it.
Please.
I am for dessert.
Can I clip this for social media?
Absolutely. I am for dessert. For dessert.
Yeah.
I am not for dessert for breakfast, lunch, snacks, and dinner.
Yeah.
Breakfast cereal is dessert. Yogurt is dessert. Chinese chicken salad is dessert. So you have to rethink the food that enters your mouth and reclassify it. Dessert? Not dessert. What determines it? Enough said.
Even when the sort of traditional folks that believe in energy balance say, look, sugar is not an issue as long as we control for calories, right?
And that is absolute hogwash.
I'd love you to expand on that, because I genuinely am somebody that is trying to make sense of it all, right? Because you're saying that you're for dessert. And obviously the vast majority of Americans, and now increasingly the world, we're exporting the standard American diet.
Right.
People are not eating within the traditional sense of calories. They're overeating, and they're overeating on ultra-processed food, which also comes along with a lot of sugar. But if somebody came in and said, hey, if you're exercising and you are generally watching the total level of calories you have, then don't pay attention too much to sugar independently. Why is that not correct?
2 reasons. First reason, alcohol. Okay, so alcohol is 7 calories per gram. So in order for alcohol to be an obesity and metabolic syndrome producing substance based on calories, you would have to consume basically about 50 grams, about 350 calories of alcohol to make it that true. So 50 grams of alcohol. How much alcohol is that? That's a lot of alcohol. All right. We just talked about,
So you're even saying that even
glass
though
of wine,
alcohol
yeah,
is not that high in terms of total calories,
right,
it still has a super detrimental impact on the body.
alcohol is not dangerous because it's calories.
Mm-hmm.
Alcohol is dangerous because it's alcohol.
Right.
Sugar is not dangerous because it's calories. Sugar is dangerous because it's sugar. For the same reasons. That's the first reason. Second reason, we talked about it earlier. Leptin resistance. The inability to see your leptin. The higher your sugar consumption, the more your insulin resistance. The more your insulin resistance, the less well your brain can see its leptin. The less well your brain can see its leptin, the more your brain thinks it's starving, and the more you'll eat those calories. So you can get your calories down, not by starving yourself, not by dieting and caloric restriction. You can get your calories down by getting rid of the insulin resistance, which means getting rid of the sugar, because that's what caused the insulin resistance, because it's the fat in your liver that led to the insulin resistance, because your pancreas makes insulin to make the liver do its job. And when you've got the fat in your liver that the sugar caused, now your liver doesn't do its job. Now your pancreas has to make extra insulin. Now you've got insulin resistance. Now you've got high insulin levels at the brain. Now your leptin doesn't work. So all of those extra calories you're eating is because your brain doesn't see the leptin because of the sugar you ate. Fix the sugar, you'll fix the calories too.
And this,
No, but it doesn't work the other way around. So it's not about the calories. And I'll be happy to debate anybody who says it does.
So as a byproduct of this, you would also say that somebody could have their calories within range. They could even be at their sort of a match between their general day-to-day energy expenditure and their calories. But if we look at their labs and their fasting insulin, that could be really high.
Could be.
Even if their calories are within range.
So there is a phenomenon, which I think we talked about at the last time I was on the podcast. It's called TOFI, T-O-F-I. Thin on the outside, fat on the inside, real medical term. 1,500 Medline citations, coined by Dr. Jimmy Bell, neuroimager at University College London. You can be thin sick, and you can be fat healthy. 20% of obese people are fat healthy. Now, 80% are fat sick, I agree. Okay, no argument.
Did you say
obesity
overweight?
is a risk factor.
Did you say overweight or obese?
Obese.
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 So that is significantly, that's like, I don't know in terms of BMI, but you're talking about
BMI over 30.
BMI over 30. Okay.
So 20% of obese people, though, are healthy.
From like your typical metabolic labs.
From the metabolic labs and for the diseases of metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, fatty liver disease, polycystic ovarian disease. The diseases that are killing Americans, 75% of healthcare dollars are due to metabolic syndrome diseases that sugar drives.
So 20% of those people that are obese, they still could be healthy.
Absolutely. Conversely, 60% of the normal weight population have the exact same diseases as do the obese. Normal weight people get type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, cardiovascular disease, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Now they get it at a lower BMI. So it can't be the obesity because they're normal weight. Their BMI is below 30. Okay. They're thin sick as opposed to fat healthy. So just because you're thin doesn't mean you're healthy, and just because you're fat doesn't mean you're sick. So there's this thing called TOFI. So my question to everyone who's listening to this podcast right now, look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself the question, am I a TOFI?
And generally, a lot of people wouldn't know this, but what body fat percentage would that be, right?
Well, it could be very little body fat percentage. Depends on where the body fat is.
So you're talking about abdominal body fat.
No, I'm talking about liver body fat.
Liver
fat.
Which isn't that correlated with the abdominal body fat too?
Usually,
like
but
you
not
see a lot
always.
of Indians and South Asians that are TOFI.
Usually, but not always.
Not always.
That's right. Usually, but not always. So here, there are 3 fat depots in the body. 3. Okay, and they contribute differentially to disease. This is very important. Fat depot number 1, subcutaneous or big butt fat. As in, does this bathing suit make me look fat? Never answer that question. Total loser. Okay. Guaranteed. Okay. Now, here's the question. How many pounds of subcutaneous fat do you have to gain before you get sick?
Ooh. I'd love to know.
About 22 on average.
Okay.
10 kilos.
Before
22
type
pounds.
2 diabetes and other things comes in.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay. 22. Now, why so much? The answer is because subcutaneous fat does not drain into the liver. Subcutaneous fat drains into the heart. So when subcutaneous fat accumulates, the border of the fat vacuole in the fat cell starts to break down. The grease gets spilled. The macrophages come in to clean up the grease. They release the cytokines. The cytokines then circulate in the peripheral bloodstream, which is 6 liters. And so the concentration doesn't go up very high. And so the liver doesn't see a very high concentration of these cytokines. And it's the concentration of cytokines that the liver sees that determines whether or not the liver gets sick. So about 22 pounds. All right. Fat depot number 2, visceral fat, belly fat.
And the fat between organ systems.
Yes.
Yeah.
The visceral fat. It's called. How many pounds or kilos of visceral fat do you have to gain before you get sick?
I would guess it's probably less than 22.
5.
5.
Maybe 6. Okay? 22 for sub-Q fat because it drained into the general circulation. 5 or 6 for the visceral fat because it drains into the portal vein. The portal vein goes straight to the liver. So if your visceral fat accumulates and you start breaking down that fat vacuole and the grease starts spilling and the macrophages start coming in, okay, those cytokines are going to be at much higher concentration because they only have to populate the portal system, the portal vein, from the gut to the liver. There are two portal systems in your body. What's a portal system?
What's a portal system, and also what is draining? Like, what is actually draining?
Exactly. So that's right. What does it drain? So normally, the way blood goes in your body, it goes heart, aorta, artery, organ, vein, vena cava, heart. Okay. That's called a systemic circulation. A portal circulation goes like this: heart, aorta, artery 1, organ 1, artery 2, organ 2, vena cava, heart. So the blood has to go through two organs to come back to the heart. And there's information being carried from organ 1 to organ 2, which tells organ 2 what to do. So there are two portal systems in the body. One is the hypothalamus to pituitary. We know why that is, because that runs all the different hormonal systems of the body. And the other one's pancreas to liver, because the liver is the primary target of insulin action. And so when the liver gets fat, the pancreas has to make more insulin to make the liver do its job. And because the liver gets fat, and because it's at the end of that portal system, the liver doesn't have to get very sick for the pancreas to start making extra insulin and causing problems. Now, the question is, where did the visceral fat come from? Did it come from the diet? No. People think that belly fat is from the diet. No. This is the big, mistake.
Where does it come from?
Stress. And the reason we know that is because you can take people who are chronically depressed, who are suicidal, who basically have to be admitted to the hospital to keep themselves from killing themselves. And you put them in a scanner, and they're not eating. And so they're losing weight. Hallmark of depression, losing weight. And their subcutaneous fat is going down, and their visceral fat is going up. They're losing weight, and their visceral fat is going up. Because cortisol, the stress hormone, is the driver of that visceral fat.
So would you say that for most people that are dealing with belly fat, stubborn belly fat, that stress is the primary driver?
Absolutely.
I guess where I'm trying to contextualize that is that those people also probably, the vast majority, are also still consuming extra calories.
Of course, because that's one of the treatments for stress, is overeating.
So you could say that you could potentially create a control experiment where you had people losing weight, you stress them out to such a degree that the cortisol is increasing in their body and their belly fat goes up.
So we did the opposite at UCSF. We did a study where we took patients with exactly that situation and taught them mindfulness.
So can you explain what that study was?
It's
like, what was the conditions?
It was called the SHINE study.
Were you controlling for what they eat or anything else like that?
We took postmenopausal women and we basically taught them how to meditate.
So you weren't controlling their food or anything like that?
We didn't touch their food. We only taught them to meditate. But we studied them before and 6 months and 18 months later.
And when you say studied, what were you looking at?
We were looking at their fat depots.
And cortisol as well?
Cortisol, and also insulin and insulin resistance. Exactly. And what we found was that weight didn't change that much. But in the mindfulness group, their belly fat went way down and their insulin levels went way down.
Could that also be, just asking, is that also a byproduct of you've lowered your stress, you're doing less sort of stress eating and coping, and so naturally you're sort of adjusting and not reaching out for sugar and processed foods?
Exactly.
So
But-
you're not saying that calories wasn't a part of the
Well,
equation.
but they didn't lose weight.
They didn't lose weight.
They
So there-
didn't lose weight.
But there was an adjustment in where that weight was distributed.
Exactly. And that correlated with improvement in their metabolic health, unrelated to weight. Another reason why this is not about calories.
You could have a situation where somebody's body composition is adjusting, right? So they don't lose weight, right? Like I get caliper tested every couple of weeks as part of my working with this trainer, and it's part of my goal, having turned 40 and making sure my
Right.
lean muscle mass stays strong,
Right.
but that I still do it without, but keeping my fasting insulin low, keeping my glucose balanced. So my body composition is adjusted sometimes where my fat percentage is going down. You can see a little bit more of my abs,
Right.
but my lean mass is going up.
Up. Right. And you measure that on the scale. Exactly right. The more muscle, the better off you are.
But there could be a week where my weight kind of stays the same, but my body composition is improving.
Indeed. And that's what we showed in this mindfulness study. So it's called the SHINE study. It was run by Rick Hecht and Alyssa Eppel, my colleague.
Yeah, we've had her on the
UCSF.
podcast before. She's
Yes,
great.
absolutely. She was the co-PI on this, and we showed that mindfulness did not change weight; it changed health because it got rid of the cortisol, because it got rid of the insulin resistance, because it got rid of the visceral fat.
Would one way to know that even the next degree, could you potentially control calories and really drive it home? Potentially?
Sure.
Is that a possibility?
Sure.
I'm just sort of asking, I'm stress testing the idea because we have so many people in our audience who hear different sides of the story from different people. And I'm just trying to, because I have this time with you, I'm trying to ask the tough questions that enlighten us all.
Right. What that would do is that would help reduce subcutaneous fat, which of course is the fat that everyone sees.
Right.
But it's not the fat you can see that makes you sick. It's the fat you can't see that makes you sick. That's the nugget of truth that people don't want to own up to.
So the fat deposits, one was the subcutaneous fat, one was the visceral fat,
and number three, liver fat.
Liver fat.
So how many pounds or kilos of liver fat do you have to accumulate before you get sick?
It's got to be a super tiny amount. It's got to be probably less than like,
half a kilo,
pound.
1 pound.
Okay, got it.
Now, can you measure 1 pound on the scale?
You can.
No, you can't.
You can't.
No, you can't.
Because
One
there's so
good
much
poop.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much weight fluctuation.
It's in the realm of error.
Yeah.
Okay.
Depending on your bowel movement that day,
Yeah.
and a bunch of other things.
Yeah. No, you can't measure 1
So
pound.
people don't know that they're getting fat in their liver.
Exactly. But the fat in your liver is the primary driver of that chronic metabolic disease. And today, 45% of Americans have fatty liver disease. Considering that no one had ever heard of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease before 1980, and now 45% of Americans have it, that is the biggest epidemic in the history of the world, including COVID.
And you're saying that is driving chronic disease?
Exactly.
But also our obesity epidemic?
Well, if you become insulin resistant and your pancreas has to make more insulin and your insulin levels rise, and then that insulin works on your adipocyte, yes.
Because having a fatty liver is part of the process of somebody ultimately becoming insulin resistant?
Exactly right.
It's
That's
mind-blowing when you start to understand it.
So 22 pounds of sub-Q fat equals 5 pounds of visceral fat equals 1 pound of liver fat. You tell me which one's worst. What is the worst?
I mean, it sounds like essentially what we're doing is we are creating foie gras with our entire population. We're force feeding sugar.
And what do you make? What do you give to the goose to make the foie gras?
Corn, I believe.
Well,
right?
refined carbohydrate, but you know what makes it go faster?
What?
Sugar.
So like, what are they serving to the goose to create this fatty liver that is served as a delicacy, which we call foie gras?
Oh, well,
I don't need it.
They don't serve it. They stuff it.
Yeah, they literally shove it down its throat.
They shove it down
which
its
is why it's
gullet.
considered a cruel practice.
Exactly.
But what is the mixture? Do you know what they're giving them?
It's a corn sugar mixture.
Corn sugar. So
corn and sugar.
Corn and sugar.
Yeah.
Would it have a large percentage of fructose?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes it the fastest.
And so essentially most people are doing this voluntarily because ultra-processed foods are so addictive and their palate and their brain has been hijacked.
Right. And it's soft drinks that are the main lining of that sugar to
Soft drinks is
create
the main
that
component.
fatty liver. That's right. So we have to fix that first. And when you fix the fatty liver, you'll fix the insulin resistance. When you fix the insulin resistance, you'll fix the insulin. When you fix the insulin, you'll fix the leptin. When you fix the leptin, you'll fix the weight.
Which is why your classic tagline, if you could repeat it for us, starts off with protecting the liver.
So let's talk about how we can all fix this. In my book, Metabolical, I basically say that in order to turn metabolic disease around, you have to adhere to 2 precepts. Protect the liver, feed the gut. 6 words. Protect the liver, feed the gut. 2 clauses, 6 words. Now, the reason I did that, the reason I said that was because Michael Pollan, in his book, Food Rules, said 7 words. He said, eat food, not too much, mostly plants.
Right.
I had to come in under that.
Yeah. But would you still agree with that advice of Michael Pollan?
No.
No. You don't think that gets the full equation?
Michael's a friend. I've had him to dinner at my house and his wife Judith, and they're wonderful and delightful. I actually think that those 3 clauses are all incorrect. Eat food. Well, we just learned that processed food is not food. Mm-hmm. Not too much.
Well, he doesn't consider like ultra processed foods.
I understood.
But he does say if you can make it inside the home, he's okay with French fries as long as you make it inside the home.
Yeah.
But he knows that that's very tough to do.
Right.
But you guys still disagree. He would still consider French fries food, and you don't consider that.
If you burn the olive oil, maybe not, when you're making the French fries. Not too much. Well, you know what? If you fix the leptin resistance, you won't eat too much of your own volition. You don't have to worry about it.
But you still do agree generally that we don't want people to eat too much.
Of course.
But you guys have a different opinion on sort of the mechanism of getting there.
Right.
Okay.
And finally, mostly plants. Well, don't forget Coke, Oreos, and Doritos are all vegan. So I had to come in at fewer words than 7. So I said, protect the liver, feed the gut. I lied. There are 3 more words. Support the brain.
Right. I was going to say it's incomplete. There's a little bit more to it.
And I thought about it and I thought about it. Do I want to put this in the book? Do I want to put this in the book? If I do this, it's going to increase the number of chapters by 4. And it's already 416 pages. Do I really need this? And I decided, you know what? Save it for the next book. But there's actually 9 words. Protect the liver, feed the gut, support the brain. We call this now, this rubric of 3 principles, the metabolic matrix. These 3 clauses: protect the liver, feed the gut, support the brain. Now, we started talking about how are we going to feed everybody. We started talking about the fact that ultra-processed food is not going away. And to be honest with you, I don't even think we want it to go away because we have to feed 10 billion people by 2050. And we're not going to be able to. We can't afford the food waste, and we can't afford the inefficient land use that is inherent in real food. As much as I want processed food to disappear, I know it won't, and I know it can't. And of course, the food industry will never let it because this is way too profitable for them. So this means that we have to come to some peaceful coexistence, like we did with tobacco, like we did with alcohol. We have to find a peaceful coexistence. This is why I said I'm not a purist, I'm a practicalist. We have to somehow find a way to make processed food healthy. And we've done it. So let me tell you about my most recent project.
Which was also a paper
which we put out in Frontiers in Nutrition, came out March 30th. And the title of the paper is The Metabolic Matrix, Re-Engineering Ultra-Processed Foods to Protect the Liver, Feed the Gut, and Support the Brain. The first author is Tim Harlan, who is the head of culinary medicine at George Washington University. Rachel Gao is the second author. She is a fatty acid expert and ran the NIH's omega-3 ADD trial. Third author is Andreas Kornstadt, who is a data scientist, computer scientist from Stanford, who lives in Hamburg. Fourth is Wolfram Alderson, who happens to be my social media director and also happens to be a food activist and advocate for his entire career, and then me. In 2020, I get an email from the chief business officer of a company I'd never heard of. Kuwaiti Danish dairy company. They're in Kuwait. They're like the Nestle of the Middle East. They make lots of crap. They make frozen yogurts. They make ice cream and flavored milks and confectionery and tomato sauce and biscuits and, like everything that's bad. And of course, Kuwait has an 18% diabetes rate and an 80% obesity rate. Now, the founder and CEO of this company is a gentleman by the name of Sir Mohammed Jafar. Now, Sir and Jafar don't usually go together. He's a Kuwaiti national who was born in the UK, and he's founded this company, and KDD fed the Kuwaiti population through the first Gulf War, and Queen Elizabeth knighted him. Sir Mohammed Jafar. Wonderful guy. Terrific guy. Think the world of him. But Sir Mohammed had a problem. He weighed 400 pounds, and at age 48, he had developed type 2 diabetes.
Wow.
And he went to his UK physicians, and they put him on insulin and oral hypoglycemics, and he got worse. And he felt like shit. And so he started researching himself on the internet. And he found Jason Fung, nephrologist in Toronto, who's a big proponent of intermittent fasting, and me. And he started doing what we said. And lo and behold, within 9 months, he had lost 100 pounds. His type 2 diabetes went away. His back pain resolved. And he thinks we hung the moon. Okay.
Incredible.
And then he has his aha moment, his moment of epiphany. And he says, holy shit. If I did this to myself, eating my own crap, what am I doing to the rest of the Middle East? So he talks it over with his sister, who's the chief financial officer. And they agree. They're privately held. They don't have, Wall Street quarterly reports. They don't have stockholders to placate. They're going to turn this company around. And they're going to make processed food healthy. They're going to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And so the chief business officer of KDD emails me, would I have an audience with Sir Mohammed? Sure. So we have a lovely conversation over Zoom during the pandemic. And he stakes us to developing a scientific advisory team, which I've just mentioned, and to basically evaluate their entire 180-item portfolio to determine what needs to stay, what needs to go, how to make what stays healthy, and how to re-engineer it and how to market it. Wow. By the way, I took no money for this because it's a food company, conflict of interest. Did this gratis.
Even that means, you funding the team, like everybody's time?
So everyone cut their own contract.
Everybody had an individual relationship. You're just saying your relationship
my
was
relationship
you didn't take on any
was
money.
no money in my pocket.
Yeah.
For this effort. Okay. Conflict of interest. I'm very, very clear. I do not take money from food companies. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyway, we developed a procedure. We developed a set of principles. We developed a tier system to determine how to get from tier 3, which means basically poison, all the way up to tier 1, which would basically be the healthiest thing on the planet. And what steps had to be achieved and what criteria had to be met. We sent all of their ingredients that they use for biochemical analysis by a company called Eurofins, which is in Des Moines, Iowa, so that we knew exactly what was in the food, so we knew what we were dealing with in the first place. We rethought all of their recipes. We rethought all of their components. For instance, there are no cows in Kuwait because it's too hot. They get all of their milk from milk powders from New Zealand. Well, what were the cows in New Zealand consuming? What was in the milk powders? We had to test it. Was there any omega-3s in the milk powders? We had to test it to find out exactly what we were dealing with to start with and whether or not KDD had to change vendors in order to be able to do this. We had to think about how to get certain ingredients into the food, like omega-3s. And how would we do that? We had to talk about sugar a lot. What are we going to do? And we said, if we take the sugar out, you can't make ice cream, you can't make frozen yogurt, you can't make flavored milks. You could put diet sweeteners in, but that's not so good. How are we going to do this? What diet sweetener would we use? So all of these things went into the hopper in terms of figuring it out. We also had to be able to sell it, because we're not trying to put KDD out of business. We're trying to actually help them grow their business, not kill it. So we had to talk about the role of fructose on the reward center. We figured out that we had to keep 1 teaspoon of sugar per serving in order to get that nucleus accumbens activation, to make the food worth eating. Have you ever tasted a no sugar chocolate bar?
Oh, yeah. Like 100% cacao?
No. Like with, like sweeteners.
Meaning it has no sugar.
But it's sweet.
It's sweetened with like stevia.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've tried some of those. Yep.
What do you think of them?
You don't get that full sugar effect.
Right.
Like a Lily's brand.
Do you ever want to go back for another one?
My palate is different,
So is mine.
So I will sometimes go back for them, right? There's a brand called Lily's. I don't try to do a lot of sugar alcohols. Yep. But I'll sometimes
now we know erythritol is associated with cardiovascular disease.
That's a little controversial because, the study wasn't well done. And we had a lot of people kind of dissect it.
It's a meta-analysis and it's garbage in, garbage out. I got it.
Yeah.
I got it.
But there are some concerns that people have. In particular, my body tells me immediately, and I have a very sensitive gut. So if I have too much erythritol, I feel it in my gut right away.
Many people do.
So, but going back to your point that you were making, you were asking me, like, have I ever had chocolate that is not sweetened with sugar? You said, do you ever want to go back? And I said, well, my palate's a little bit different. I do sometimes, but I don't want to reach for it the same way that I reach for real sugar.
Right, exactly. So we needed to basically spike the whatever the product was with enough sugar to make it valuable from a taste standpoint, but not enough to cause damage.
And that for you found out was a teaspoon. 1 teaspoon.
4 grams of sugar, 2 grams of fructose. Recognizing that the ultimate lid, the upper limit, is 12 grams.
And how did that compare for what previously they had per serving?
It's like, a 77% reduction.
So now you have 4 grams of sugar per serving.
Right.
And so previously they were having almost
16 to 20 to sometimes 24 grams of sugar.
Okay, got it.
Per serving.
Per serving.
Right. So how do you extend the sweetness? Like if it's ice cream, 4 grams of sugar ain't going to do it. How do you make ice cream with 4 grams of sugar? Kind of hard. So we had to basically do a lot of experimentation. And Tim Harlan got really good at making ice cream. Made a lot of ice cream during this thing. We figured out that we could basically extend the sweetness with a natural sugar that's new. It's relatively new. It's on the market. It's in many foods here in the United States, called allulose.
Yeah, I've tried it before.
And allulose is not sweet enough to be standalone, but it is good enough to extend the sweetness of sugar.
So you take regular sugar and allulose, and you sort of get more bang for the buck.
Right, with less metabolic perturbation.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, allulose actually seems to have a good biochemical profile. It actually lowers LDL and raises HDL. So that might be a good thing. We need more work on it. But
how much allulose did you have to use?
Not that much.
Okay, great. Because I
Not that
often hear
much.
some of the same
It's
concerns
expensive.
with erythritol about allulose, that a lot of it can cause some gut irritation.
Yeah,
but
we
you didn't have to
use
use
much.
that much.
No, we didn't have to use much.
So was that it? Was that the magic formula right there?
Well, that's one of the magic formulas. We had a lot of magic formulas to make this work. The point is that all of this is in the paper, and we very specifically told KDD when we took this job on, when we agreed to this project, that we would be publishing this as a roadmap for other companies to be able to follow suit, because it doesn't matter if KDD does this.
Right.
It's not going to fix the world's problem.
Yeah.
Everyone has to do it. And so they have to know how. And so that this had to become public knowledge. This was not a proprietary issue.
And the honest truth is that I feel like I'm so glad that this individual, KDD, and the company and his whole team, which was a part of it, was so excited, because you do need, people that are key stakeholders to get behind it.
Yeah.
And my personal experience, having friends in the Middle East, family in India also as well, which is not the Middle East, but I find that the craving and the addiction for sugar is even stronger there than it is in the sort of marketplace in the United States. So it's good that you guys publish it for everybody, because who knows, maybe it's an American company that sort of figures out how to get started.
No, this is a huge problem in India, an enormous problem. And the thing is, India has a higher diabetes rate than the United States does.
Yeah.
We have a 10% diabetes rate. India has a 14% diabetes rate, and they're not fat.
Hey, YouTube, if you enjoyed what you just saw, keep watching for more great content on how to improve your brain and your life.
Glucose is uptaken by every single cell in the body, but because cancer cells are revved up, they are able to actually take that nutrient and actually fuel themselves.